On the news, Ukraine seeks ICC probe into alleged prisoner of war killing. Sri Lanka anticipates IMF approval for $2.9 billion package after China's aid. China says invincible hand pushing for Russia-Ukraine crisis escalation. Canadian leader orders probe into alleged election interference by China, and North Korea cautions U.S. against shooting down its missile launches. Ukraine has asked the International Criminal Court (ICC) to probe gruesome footage circulating on social media allegedly showing Russian forces killing a Ukrainian prisoner of war with a series of blasts from assault weapons. The amateur video apparently shows a detained soldier standing in a shallow trench wearing camouflage. The man said "Sluva Ukraine" or "Glory to Ukraine" before shooting multiple times. The victim slumps to the ground as rounds from automatic weapons repeatedly hit his body. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba wrote on social media on Monday horrific video of an unarmed Ukrainian POW executed by Russia forces merely for saying "glory to Ukraine." Another piece of proof this war is genocidal. Kuleba said it was imperative that prosecutor Karim Khan launches an immediate ICC investigation into this heinous war crime. Perpetrators must face justice, he added. The Foreign Ministry in a tweet separately said killing prisoners of war is a war crime. Those responsible for such crimes will face punishment. Authenticity, date or location of the video, which is of poor quality, could not instantly be verified. Russia's defense ministry did not comment. The "glory to Ukraine" phrase and the response "Heroyam Slava" or "glory to the heroes" has been a hallmark of post-Soviet Ukraine, but it has taken on special meaning as a common greeting in public life since the beginning of the Russian invasion a year ago. It has also served to rally international support for Ukraine. The president of the bankrupt island nation says Sri Lanka anticipates final nod from the International Monetary Fund (IMF) for a $2.9 billion loan in the third or fourth week of this month. Ranil Wickremesinghe told Parliament on Tuesday that with renewed support from China, all funding requirements had been met. The South Asian nation of 22 million people is battling with its worst economic crisis since its independence from Britain in 1948. It defaulted on its $46 billion foreign debt last April, which triggered months of food and fuel shortages around the nation. Wickremesinghe said there were indications the economy was improving, but that the country still did not have sufficient foreign currency for all its imports, making the MIF deal critical, so other creditors should also begin releasing funds. Sri Lanka has completed all prior actions that were required by IMF, he said. Last night was received a new letter from the China Exim Bank. The central bank governor and I signed a letter of intent and sent it to the MIF. As a result of this step and financing assurances from India and the Paris Club, we expect approval for the program either in the third or fourth week of March, according to him. Wickremesinghe's administration has enforced sharp tax hikes, ended subsidies on petrol and electricity, and made plans to sell off loss-making state enterprises to satisfy the terms of the MIF bailout. It was not clear what latest support China, the world's biggest sovereign creditor, extended to Sri Lanka. On Monday, the Export-Import Bank of China in January offered Sri Lanka a loan on its debt and said it will help the country's attempts to secure the MIF loan, which a Sri Lankan source said at the time was not sufficient to meet IMF conditions. China and India are Sri Lanka's biggest lenders. By the end of 2020, Sri Lanka owed China's Exim Bank $2.83 billion, or 3.5% of the island's external debt, according to MIF data. In total, Sri Lanka owed Chinese lenders $7.4 billion, or closely a fifth of public external debt by end 2022. Calculations by the China Africa Research Initiative showed. Chinese Foreign Minister King Kang on Tuesday said the country will continue to participate in the settlement of international debt problems in a constructive manner. Sri Lanka's rupee currency hit a mid-rate of 3.25 on Tuesday, appreciating 12%, analysts said, against the central bank's set spot rate of 337.67%. The appreciation was driven by better dollar inflows from tourism and remittances, positive sentiment over the emittent approval of an MIF deal, and a turn down on imports, they said. Sri Lanka needs to repay about $6 billion on average each year until 2029 and will have to keep engaging with the MIF, Wickremesinghe added. Countries in debt distress such as Zambia and Sri Lanka have faced unprecedented delays in securing IMF bailouts as China and Western economies have clashed over how to provide debt relief. Sri Lanka has been waiting for about 187 days to finalize a bailout after reaching a staff-level deal with the International Monetary Fund. On politics, according to China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang, the Ukraine war appears to be driven by an invisible hand pushing for the extension and increase of the conflict. The invisible hand is using the Ukraine crisis to serve particular geopolitical agendas, Qin said at a press conference on the sidelines of the country's annual parliamentary meeting in Beijing without being specific who he was referring to, calling for a dialogue to begin as soon as possible. China's position on the Ukraine war has come under fresh scrutiny in recent weeks amidst its strengthening relationship with Moscow and concern in Western capitals that it cannot be an honest broker in any potential peace discussions when it has refused to name Russia as the aggressor in the conflict. Russia sent its forces into Ukraine on February 24th last year in what it calls a special military operation. The conflict has left Ukrainian cities in ruins, sent millions fleeing abroad and undermined the global economy. Qin emphasized that Beijing had not made available weapons to either side of the Ukraine conflict amidst comments from United States officials on unspecified consequences for China should it send lethal help to Russia. Qin also spoke about the U.S.-China relationship, saying he hoped the two countries could find the right way to get along, reports said, stressing that the self-ruled island of Taiwan was central to the conduct of ties between Beijing and Washington, describing it as the core of the core issues and the first red line that must not be crossed in U.S.-China relations. Still on politics, Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister, has called for a review of foreign interference in his country's elections and will appoint an independent special investigator to investigate alleged Chinese interference in Canada's polls. Trudeau has come under pressure to act amidst Canadian media reports citing anonymous intelligence sources that detail alleged schemes run by China to influence Canada's elections in 2021 and 2019. According to a report last month that China preferred to see Trudeau's Liberals re-elected in 2021 poll and had worked to defeat conservative politicians considered unfriendly to Beijing. Opposition parties have demanded a full public probe. The Prime Minister said he had asked legislators in the Parliament's National Security Committee to unveil an investigation to assess the state of foreign interference in the country's federal electoral process. He also said he will appoint an eminent Canadian who will have powers to make recommendations on protecting and enhancing democracy in Canada, including holding a public inquiry or another formal independent review process. Canada's National Security and Intelligence Review Agency will also investigate how the country's intelligence services took care of the threat of foreign interference during the polls and reports its findings to Parliament. Trudeau and Canada's top security officials have recognized China's intrusion attempts but maintain that election outcomes were not altered. They have not confirmed the details of the media reports. Trudeau also raised serious concerns over the alleged Chinese election interference with China's President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the Group of 20 G20 meeting in Indonesia in November. Now, North Korea has said that any step to interrupt and shoot down its test missiles will be considered a declaration of war. The statement on Tuesday by Kim Yo-jong, the powerful sister of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, according to reports, said the United States planned to shoot down Pyongyang's intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, if the weapons were test-launched towards the Pacific Ocean. The U.S. and its allies have never shot down North Korean ballistic missiles, typically launched at steep angles to avoid neighboring countries, but the question has drawn fresh scrutiny since Pyongyang suggested it will fire more missiles over Japan. The fair rhetoric from North Korea comes as the U.S. and South Korea reinstate and scale up their joint military exercises following a record number of missile tests by Pyongyang last year. On Monday, the U.S. deployed a B-52 bomber for a combined drill with South Korean fighter jets in what South Korea's defense ministry said was a show of force against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. The U.S. and South Korean militaries are also getting ready to revive their largest drills later this month. The field training exercises, known as Warrior Shield FTX, will include amphibious landings and run alongside the Freedom Shield exercise, a computer-simulated command post training targeted at boosting defense and response capabilities. Kim Yo-jong warned on Tuesday that North Korea was prepared to take overwhelming actions against the exercises. She has repeatedly warned against rising U.S. presence on the Korean peninsula, saying last month that the frequency of using the Pacific as our firing range depends upon Washington troops. In a separate statement on Tuesday, North Korea's foreign ministry called the flyover of the U.S. B-52 bomber a reckless provocation that pushes the situation on the peninsula deeper into the bombless quagmire. More stories say no less than 15 killed in Indonesian landslides, dozens missing. At least 15 people have been killed, with lots missing after torrential rains and landslides hit Indonesia's Natuna region on the edge of the South China Sea. Footages from the National Disaster Mitigation Agency, BNBP, showed landslides flowing through forested areas and dumping mud and debris on houses on the remote Sarasan Island. On Monday, bits of metal from torn-off roofs and falling trees were also visible following the disaster. The location of the landslide and continued rain were complicating search and rescue efforts, the BNBP said on Twitter. Communications had also been cut off, it said. Abdul Rahman, the Natuna Search and Rescue Agency's head, said 15 people have been confirmed dead and 50 were missing, according to reports. A 60-person search and rescue team left for the island on Monday afternoon, with the journey anticipated to take 7 to 8 hours by fast boat. BNBP spokesperson Abdul Muhari said a helicopter will be sent on Tuesdays to speed up the logistics delivery process. A main road in the area was also cut off because of the landslides, further hampering the evacuation process. Indonesia is prone to landslide during the rainy season. Serious in some places by deforestation and continued torrential rain has triggered flooding in different areas of the archipelago nation. Professionals say the country's weather-linked disasters are possibly being made worse by climate change. Senators urged to increase Bahrain human rights at International Assembly. Rights groups are urging members of parliament attending this year's Interparliamentary Union, IPU, in Bahrain to use the assembly to add concerns about the dire state of political freedom in the Gulf country. In a joint letter to the delegates of the IPU assembly, the 22 organizations, including Human Rights Watch, PEN International and Reprieve, noted 2 ex-members of Bahrain's parliament were presently in detention. The assembly is due to begin in Manama, Bahrain's capital, on March 11th. The country has been accused of widespread crackdowns following pro-democracy protests in 2011, and opposition politicians, along with activists, bloggers and human rights defenders, remain in jail over their roles in those demonstrations and more recent protests. 3 independent United Nations experts in December expressed concern for the alleged arbitrary detention and subsequent arrests of human rights activists Yusuf Ahmed Hassan Kadem, 17-year-old Ali Mustafa Majid Maki, and 2 unidentified 16-year-olds for taking part in protests against normalization of ties with Israel. Among the requests to the legislators attending the IPU, the letter urged them to press for the unconditional and instant release of all political prisoners and the removal of so-called political isolation laws that were introduced in 2018 and banned former members of the parties from running for parliament or sitting on the boards of governors of civil society organizations. It also called for an end to torture and ill treatment and for citizenship to be restored in line with the United Nations recommendations for all those arbitrarily stripped of their nationality. Authorities in Bahrain refute accusations of human rights abuses and say its elections are democratic. The IPU was founded in 1889 to promote dialogue and diplomacy. Its twice-yearly assemblies are part of its decision-making mechanism, and the Bahrain event will emphasize on promoting peaceful coexistence and inclusivity. The 145th Assembly was held in Rwandan capital, Kigali. Lastly, in global news, in Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa reshuffles cabinet. In a long-awaited cabinet reshuffle late Monday, South Africa's president unveiled his new government. It is comprised of 11 ministers and 9 deputy ministers. The naming of the new electricity minister captured the attention of the public. The state-owned power utility has executed rolling power cuts across the nation for years, but 2022 was the worst. We are establishing 2 new ministries. The first of this is the Minister for Electricity to deal with the immediate crisis of load shedding. The second is the minister with specific responsibilities for planning, monitoring and evaluation to focus greater attention on the performance of government. Ramaphosa has faced protests across the country. The ever-worsening power crunch in which homes and businesses go without electricity for up to 10 hours per day is choking Africa's most developed economy. Our most immediate task is to drastically reduce the severity of load shedding in the coming months and ultimately end load shedding altogether. The president last month declared a state of disaster to deal with the electricity shortages affecting the 60 million South Africans. Power utility Eskom, which turns 100 years old, is grappling with the recurrent breakdowns of its coal-fired power stations. He also announced a new deputy president in the reshuffle and dropped his tourism minister. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll bring you stories from Nigeria. Welcome back. It's Zoom on Nigeria. We begin with President Muhammadu Buhari seeks duty-free market access for developing countries. President Muhammadu Buhari has called on developed and developing countries to grant duty-free and quota-free market access for products originating from the world's 46 least developed countries to guarantee their integration in regional and world value chains. The president's spokesman, Malam Garba Shehu, in a statement said Buhari, who made the call in Doha, Qatar, at the United Nations Conference of Least Developed Countries, stressed that this had become imperative to guarantee their integration in regional and global value chains. The president strongly criticized the present structure of the global financial system, which places an unsustainable external debt burden on the most vulnerable countries. He warned that such debt burdens will make it very difficult for LDCs to meet the 2030 Agenda for 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. This assistance can be provided within the framework of the Doha Program of Action, which is designed to assist LDCs exit their present classification, according to him. The Nigerian leader challenged developed countries, civil society actors and the private sector and the business community to partner with the LDCs in order to provide required resources and capacity to deliver development outcomes in the economic, social and environmental aspects of the 2030 Agenda. He listed some steps that will aid LDCs recover from COVID-19, achieve SDGs, develop and prosper over the long term. While illustrative on the issue of rising debt burden, Buhari underscored the need for reforms of the international financial architecture that prioritizes the need of least developed countries. He aligned with the United Nations Secretary General's description on the global financial system as an unfair debt architecture that not only charges poor countries much more money to borrow on the market than advanced economies, but downgrades them when they even think of restructuring their debt or applying for debt relief. In Nigeria's expectations for the conference, Buhari stated optimism that the Doha Program of Action will lead to the quickening of exports from LDCs by 2031 through the facilitation of their access to foreign markets in line with World Trade Organization Facilitation Agreement. According to Buhari, on climate change, LDCs continue to suffer unduly despite contributing least to its causes. Going further, he said climate change remains one of the biggest existential threats facing humanity today, posing challenges to lives and livelihoods and manifesting in different negative forms, including rising temperature, rising sea levels, flooding, drought and desertification. Buhari commended the state of Qatar for hosting the conference and thanked Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the emir, for inviting him. He also expressed appreciation to the United Nations for its excellent organization of the conference and its continued support for the least developing countries. On alleged homicide, court grants Ado Doguwa 500 million naira bail. On Monday, a federal high court sitting in Kano granted bail to House of Representative Majority Leader Alhassan Ado Doguwa standing trial over alleged culpable homicide. It will be recalled that last week a senior magistrate court in Kano had remanded Alhassan Ado Doguwa till Tuesday, March 7, 2023, over charges bordering on alleged culpable homicide, criminal conspiracy, illegal possession of firearm, mischief by fire, and inciting public disturbance. However, in an ex parte application yesterday for the enforcement of the rights of Alhassan Ado Doguwa, moved by Barrister Nuraini Jimo, the counsel urged the court to release the accused on bail. Following his application for bail sought by his counsel, the presiding judge, Justice Yunusa Muhammad, granted the application with 500 million naira. Meanwhile, several lawyers in the court called for the attention of the judge to the motion, but the advice was discarded as the application was granted. The court also asked him to produce 2 dependable sureties in like sum. The sureties shall be a first-class traditional rulers or senior officers in civil service, according to the court. The court similarly ordered Doguwa to drop his international passport with the court registry pending the trial. The court also restrained the defendant from going to his constituency during the forthcoming gubernatorial and State House Assembly polls scheduled for March 11th, 2023. And finally, on the news, INEC seeks court's approval to reconfigure BVAS for March 11 polls. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has approached the Court of Appeal in Abuja, praying it to vary the orders it granted for candidates of the Labour Party, LP, and People's Democratic Party, PDP, to be permitted to inspect sensitive materials that were used for the presidential polls. In its legal process dated March 4th, INEC urged the appeal court, which will sit as the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal, to vary the order to permit it to reconfigure the bimodal voter accreditation system BVAS it used for the presidential election. It told the court that the configuration was needed since the BVAS will also be deployed for the next round of elections, beginning with governorship and state assemblies elections planned for Saturday, as well as other rescheduled elections. According to INEC, without a quick variation of the inspection order granted to Obi and Atiku, particularly the aspect restraining it from tampering with formation contained in the BVAS, it will be difficult for it to proceed with the scheduled elections. It will be recalled that a 3-member panel of the court last Friday gave Obi and Atiku the approval to have access to all the sensitive materials the INEC deployed for the conduct of the presidential election that held on February 25th. The panel, led by Justice Joseph Ike, made the orders after he heard 2 separate export applications the 2 aggrieved presidential candidates filed alongside their political parties. Cited as respondents in the matter were INEC, the acclaimed winner of the presidential election, Bola Tinubu, as well as his party, the All Progressives Congress, APC. Both applications were predicated on Section 146, subsection 1 of the Electoral Act 2022, paragraph 47, 1, 2, and 3 of the first schedule of the Electoral Act of 2022, as well as under the inherent jurisdiction of the court as referenced by Section 6, subsection 6, A and B of the 1999 Constitution, as amended. To refresh our memories, Ukraine seeks ICC probe into alleged prisoner of war killing. Sri Lanka anticipates IMF approval for $2.9 billion package after China's aid. China says invisible hand pushing for Russia-Ukraine crisis escalation. Canadian leader orders probe into alleged election interference by China, and North Korea cautions U.S. against shooting down its missile launches. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.